What would you do if you discovered your husband was living a double life? For Maria, her husband's secret daily routine seemed innocent enough, until she decided to follow him. What she uncovered was more shocking than she could have ever imagined. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Stories Unfolded. We bring you stories that inspire, shock, and remind you that life is full of surprises. Let's dive into this incredible story. Maria had always considered her life with Daniel to be picture perfect. They had been married for 10 years, built a beautiful home, and raised 2 wonderful children. Daniel was a financial analyst, a steady and responsible provider. Maria worked part-time as a freelance graphic designer, balancing her career with her role as a mom. Their days were filled with soccer practices, family dinners, and weekend getaways. To anyone looking in, they were the perfect family. But all that changed one chilly Monday morning when Maria noticed something unusual. Daniel had just finished breakfast and kissed her goodbye, as he always did before heading to work. Maria watched him leave, expecting him to drive off in his shiny black SUV, the car he cherished. Instead, she saw him walk around the block and climb into an old beat-up sedan parked on a side street. Maria frowned. Why would he do that? She thought. The sedan looked like it was on its last legs, with rusted doors and a sputtering engine. It was a far cry from the sleek SUV he drove to work every day. Puzzled but unwilling to jump to conclusions, Maria brushed it off, at least for the time being. Over the next week, Maria couldn't help but notice a pattern. Every morning, Daniel left home as if heading to work, but instead of driving his SUV, he walked to the old sedan and drove off in that. Curiosity gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Where was he going? Why was he switching cars? At dinner one evening, Maria decided to casually bring it up. "Hey, how's work been?" she asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Daniel smiled. "Busy as usual. Nothing new." She hesitated before adding, "Do you still take the SUV every day?" Daniel paused briefly, then nodded. "Of course. Why?" Maria's heart sank. He was lying. But why? Maria couldn't ignore her growing suspicion. Was Daniel hiding something? Was he in trouble? Or worse, was there someone else? The thought of infidelity stung, but Maria needed answers. She decided to follow him the next morning to find out the truth. She set her alarm for dawn and waited until Daniel left the house. From her living room window, she watched as he walked to the old sedan, got in, and drove away. Grabbing her keys, Maria climbed into her own car and trailed him at a safe distance. Her heart pounded as she navigated the quiet streets, careful not to get too close. Daniel's route was strange. He didn't head toward his office in the financial district. Instead, he drove into a rundown neighborhood on the other side of town. The streets were lined with crumbling buildings and graffiti-covered walls, a stark contrast to their suburban life. Maria's grip on the steering wheel tightened. What was he doing here? Finally, Daniel parked in front of an old warehouse. Maria pulled over a block away, her breath hitching as she watched him get out of the car. He opened the trunk, pulled out a large bag, and disappeared into the building. Maria's mind raced. What was in the bag? Drugs? Money? She couldn't believe her husband, the man she thought she knew inside and out, could be involved in something illegal. Summoning her courage, Maria decided to investigate. She parked her car and crept toward the warehouse, careful to stay out of sight. The closer she got, the more her heart pounded in her chest. Through a side window, Maria peered inside. What she saw made her gasp. The large, dimly lit space was filled with folding tables, each piled high with food, clothing, and supplies. A group of people, men, women, and even children, stood in line, their faces weary but grateful. And there, in the middle of it all, was Daniel. He was smiling warmly as he handed out items from the bag he had brought. A little girl ran up to him, throwing her arms around his waist. Daniel knelt to hug her back, his expression soft and fatherly. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. Her husband wasn't hiding a crime. He was running a community outreach program. Maria stepped back from the window, overwhelmed with emotion. She waited outside the warehouse, her mind racing with questions. When Daniel finally emerged, he froze at the sight of her. "Maria," he said, his voice filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, crossing her arms. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Daniel sighed, looking down at the ground. "Because I didn't want you to worry. I know how tight our budget is, and I didn't want you to think I was taking on too much." Maria's heart ached. "Daniel, you've been doing all this on your own, running a charity in secret?" He nodded. "I started a year ago. There's this community out here that's been struggling, and I felt like I had to do something. The sedan belongs to one of the volunteers. I didn't want to draw attention by driving my SUV." Maria shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you trust me enough to share this?" "I didn't want to burden you," Daniel said softly. "And honestly, I wasn't sure if I could keep it going." Maria reached out and took Daniel's hands. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. "I want to help." Over the next few weeks, Maria joined Daniel in his outreach efforts. She used her graphic design skills to create flyers and launch a social media campaign to raise awareness for their cause. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, and more volunteers signed up to help. What had started as Daniel's quiet mission grew into a full-fledged organization, transforming lives in the community. Working together brought Maria and Daniel closer than ever. They spent late nights planning events, packing supplies, and sharing stories about the people they helped. One evening, as they were packing up donations, Daniel turned to Maria. "Thank you," he said. Maria smiled. "For what?" "For believing in me," he replied. "For turning something I was afraid to share into something beautiful." Maria kissed his cheek. "That's what partners are for," she said. This story reminds us that trust and communication are the foundation of any relationship. Daniel's secret wasn't born out of deceit, but out of a desire to protect his wife. And Maria's willingness to understand and support him turned his small act of kindness into something extraordinary. If this story inspired you, please like and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Don't forget to subscribe to Stories Unfolded for more incredible tales of love, trust, and the unexpected twists of life. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.